Welcome to Social Work Shorts Bitesize. Just a little nugget for you of something related to social work practice or theory, maybe, who knows, or both. Let's delve in. I want to talk this week about power, communication and change. Now, these three things have become a bit of a mantra for me because it struck me in teaching the modules that I teach at university that these things permeate through everything. So I wanted to talk about it. It strikes me that what we're involved in as social workers is influenced heavily through power that runs through everyone and in every structure. And that the key skill we have to shift power, one way or another, positively or negatively, is communication. And as social workers, we're seeking change, aren't we? Or we're seeking to help people deal with change, and that could be, like I said, change for the people we're working with, the children, service users, carers, families, or also change in the structures of the world we inhabit. Should social workers be more politically active? Maybe. I'll leave that question hanging with you. Power is pervasive. It's everywhere. It's a ever-present facet of social work, and people often think, don't they, that social workers have more power than they actually have. Sometimes we do have through legislation. It sometimes puts us in a decision-making role. It sometimes puts us in a safeguarding role where we can make decisions, where we can exert some sort of power to keep people safe, keep people well. But we're not as powerful as people might think we are we? It's the it's the typical stereotypical view that social workers put old people in care homes and take children or families. Well, we do those things sometimes, but not after a whole bunch of other stuff. But yet sometimes we have the power to do those things, or the power to influence, I suppose. But it's not as obvious sometimes where power exists and how it's at play. We say it's there. Often we observe the effects of power, the emotional impact of it, the position someone finds themselves in when they're exerting power or being subjected to power. But we don't often analyse, I suppose, the operation of power itself. How does it work? Foucault says that power makes things happen. Power makes things possible, and it's power that brings knowledge and action into existence. So I think that's a positive thing. I think that smacks of positivity, that it's a productive thing, or can be, possibly enabling rather than constraining and restrictive. It's there all the time, so we have to figure out how to manage it. And it's worth looking at the different forms of power. And I still don't think you can go beyond French and Raven's constructs of power or ideas of power, the range of power that they suggest. And we're going back to the late 1950s and 60s here, but that's when a lot of stuff first was thought about like this, wasn't it? People didn't just accept the status quo, but wanted to delve below the surface, and the rise of self in the 60s and the rise of the individual rather than society. Anyway, so this suggests that some people have legitimate power. Well, we've covered that. Power might be very real, getting your collar felt by the police officer, very real kind of thing, if that ever happens to you. But it might be less concrete. Maybe the other person feels you've got the right to have power over them by virtue kind of your position. And I think that's one of the places where social workers can fall foul of the misuse of power, I suppose, because people think we've got that power, don't they? So yes, and sometimes it's, again, socially constructed, isn't it? I suppose teachers, doctors, parents, all ideas of the power they have, when really they don't really have a great deal of power, unless there's some legislation backing what they're doing. But that power is very real, even though it's not real in the sense of not just being socially constructed, I suppose. And then there's referent power. They suggest that it's where the other person wants to identify with you, and talking yesterday about transference, about how sometimes people want to be like, or they see something in you, they want to be like you, or you kind of try and influence other people. often relies on prestige, I suppose. Referent power is kind of like when you see young people wanting to be like footballers and pop stars and that kind of thing. When do people stop wanting to become train drivers? Who's driving the trains? Everybody wants to be pop stars and footballers now, don't they? This is a thing that I might talk about in a future episode, actually, called mimetic desire, which I think is really important. Mimetic desire was phrased by Rollins as we desire the desires of those we desire. And mimetic desire says that it's desire that drives us to do things. And we desire the desires of those we desire just means that, like, children observe their parents, and if their parents like to, play football, then they desire those desires to please the parent. So they want to play football. My kids, both of them, like the outdoors. And I said, isn't it great that we brought them up to love the outdoors? Well, were they just desiring our desires? They know we like that, so they like that because they know that keeps us happy. We desire the desires of those we desire. That'd be worth another one of these at some point. But it's a powerful force. It's the force of the role model, isn't it? And we're affected by role models for good or evil. And then there's reward power and coercive power, different sides of the same coin. I like to think you may have power if you can reward somebody with something. You may have power if you can coerce them into something. And you can see where the threads of that are in practice or in the families that you work with, I'm sure. Then if the other person regards you as having knowledge of some description, then you might have expert power. This is an interesting one at the minute, I think, because I think there's a backlash against experts as we live in what some people have described the post-truth era. It doesn't matter what you know, it matters who you are, doesn't it? Think about our politicians. Expert power is said to increase, though, if you're seen to be unbiased. Quite interesting. So anyway, social workers are seen as experts often. I remember when the personalisation agenda first launched, and I'd go out to see older people. That was my social work practice, and we'd had conversations up until then about what we could offer, what I can offer you to solve this problem that you have. And then all of a sudden it was, well, you're the expert on your life. What do you want? It's like, well, isn't that your job? Aren't you the expert? So it's a bit of a culture shift, mind shift. So sometimes we're seen as experts. And I think particularly when we're in the multidisciplinary role, in that field, I think we need to flex that expertise. I think we've got knowledge of theoretical ideas, practice ideas, and of people that are important that other professionals don't necessarily have. It's about a different approach, isn't it? I'm fond of saying that our unique contribution to the professional world is not what we do, but how we do it. And then there's information power, sometimes referred to as persuasion power, derived from being able to communicate effectively and logically. Well, that takes us all the way back to the first one of these, which was around Aristotle's ethos, pathos, and logos, doesn't it? We have to be able to communicate logically. So power can be used positively and negatively. It's an ethical compass. We need an ethical compass to guide us. Social work, anti-oppressive practice, has got to be surely about highlighting social injustice and challenging inequality. That's why I mentioned being politically active at the start, because things are often rooted in power, in powerful structures. One of those structures might be the social work department we work in. If we go back to that idea of process over values. And people live within what has emerged from a political consensus, a political ideology, depending on who's in power. So people we work with are experiencing poverty and ill health and poor housing, poor access to opportunities, probably. And in our work, maybe we need to redress some of those issues as well as the very pragmatic assessment issues that we need to do. I mean, I'm thinking of adults there in my head when I think of that, We can offer services, we can offer adaptations, but are we really addressing the underlying societal problems? So there's a role here for challenging that when the opportunity arises. So we can work in this way, take this approach in our one-to-one interactions and in our work within the structures that we're part of. So need an awareness that while we're part of the system may well be disadvantaging people, the political ideological system, and people may not be happy with that and therefore view us negatively as being part of that system. So, and that might even be when the system, political or otherwise, doesn't fit with our professional or personal values. I mean, we still have to operate in the system, don't we, really? I suppose. Karen Healy, Australian academic, says anti-oppressive practice is based on recognition of the structural origins of service users' problems. And anti-oppressive practice should seek to transform power relations in practice. And our homegrown Neil Thompson, when it comes to our practice, Neil says there's no middle ground. Intervention either adds to oppression, or I'd argue condones it maybe, or goes in some small way towards easing it or breaking it. And I like to think if you're not part of the problem, if you're not part of the solution, then you're potentially part of the problem. So we need an awareness of the kind of social, political context to prevent ourselves from remaining part of that. Good practice, Neil Thompson says, is anti-discriminatory practice. And I keep coming back to that all the time. We have all these new fancy names for things, don't we? Strengths-based approaches and those kind of things, trauma-informed practice. I keep thinking, well, when you break it down, it's just good practice. We need good practice rooted in values, and that trauma-informed nature, that strengths-based approach will naturally fall out of good practice. I think, we don't need any more new words for anything. We just need to figure out what good practice is, and all of those things will roll out of that, So communication then is the cornerstone of that. This is this power, communication and change. Communication is the cornerstone of practice. It's how we do all of the things we do, isn't it, really? One-to-one with people, in meetings, in what we write. Our words have power and shape meaning and shape viewpoints. So we have to be careful not to reinforce negative ideas people have about themselves or negative ideas other people have about the people. But rather we need to challenge those negative ideas and communicate that people have power within themselves. I've always felt the bedrock of ethics, of social work, is that we can see in people their potential even when they might not even see it themselves. I think that's what social work does, and that's powerful stuff, and we use that to facilitate change. So we also need to look inward and consider if we need to change and if the organisations that we work in need to change. Because surely change is what social work is about. Helping people deal with change or helping people to change. Change is transformative. It's not simply functional. It's going to make massive differences. Not just practically, but emotionally, cognitively, from a mental well-being point of view. The changes might be very practical. They might be emotional. That might be what's driving it. But change, nevertheless, is going to transform. Seeks to overcome problems, but it seeks to reinvigorate people, and to the point where maybe they realise that they've had no voice, but now they can assert their citizenship. I suppose be fully functional, fully present in society. And that takes us full circle back to power, doesn't it? Power being ever present, it moves through us all. And we need to understand that and utilise it. Power, communication and change. These are the fundamentals of practice. And I believe that they interact and influence how we practice and how successful we are, our understanding of power, our use of communication, and our understanding of how people change and transform and how we give power. Not how we give power back to people, but how we help people manifest their own power. Because we don't give people power. We don't give people power through the things we do. We help them manifest their own power. That's what we need to understand. So, there you go. Thanks for listening. If you like what I'm doing here, then please go and give me a like or a follow or retweet or whatever platform you're on. Please do that. It would be great if you could subscribe to the YouTube channel. Getting some new subscribers on there is a really good thing, and you'll find out when stuff goes up. And if you want to head over to my Patreon page, there'll be things in the show notes underneath this. Then have a look at that and what's going on over there, particularly in terms of productivity, workflow, well-being, and that kind of thing. It's been lovely to talk to you. Take care.